Hey, y'all. Welcome to the Black Remembering podcast, where we highlight the heavy and the hope. I'm Nita Jade, and today's episode is a little bit different in that it's a special episode dedicated to honoring the memory, the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. As our nation's attention is a little unfocused, a little diverted, today, I'd like to encourage all of us to refocus our vision to align with that of Dr. King. When we remember Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., we often remember the Dr. King of 1963, the one who delivered the famous, legendary "I Have a Dream" speech. Today, I want to hold space to remember the Dr. King of 1967, the one who wrote, "Where do we go from here? Chaos or community?" The Dr. King of 67 shared a political philosophy that was more akin to Malcolm X than most scholars would like to admit. The Dr. King of 67 doesn't necessarily fit the comfortable mold of the Dr. King that we're encouraged to remember. Today, I'd like to refocus us on a vision, specifically on the vision that Dr. King maps out in his last book, "Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community?" In 67, only 3 years had passed since the signing of the Civil Rights Act. In 1967, the US was in the trenches, absolutely in the trenches. Does that sound familiar? There was political unrest. There were protests against the Vietnam War and social chaos since it had only been, what, 1 to 2 years since the legal separation of US citizens based on the color of our skin was deemed unconstitutional. Jim Crow laws, and more prevalently, the racist culture that created Jim Crow laws, those were slowly fading. In some ways, they're still slowly fading. So we were at a crossroads in our nation's history in 1967. Again, does this sound familiar? It was at this crossroads that Dr. King posed the crucial question, where do we go from here? AKA, what now? His question was complicated. It was a little uncomfortable. And I'd say we still haven't fully fleshed out an adequate answer, but one thing about Dr. King, he never let up on hope. He understood that there was always a what now, that there was always a what's next phase. He understood that the structure of our society relies so heavily on money and economics. He even quoted, "What does it profit a man to be able to eat at an integrated lunch counter if he doesn't earn enough money to buy a hamburger?" See, Dr. King pushed for economic reform. He pushed for democratic socialism, which is not to be confused with the authoritarian systems of the Soviet Union, but he pushed for a meaningful restructuring of our society that ensures that democracy isn't just a buzzword, that democracy didn't just exist on paper or on the ballots, but that democracy existed in our workplaces, in our day-to-day lives, in our school systems, in our factories, in our banks, in our opportunities, in our communities. He understood that racism, poverty, militarism, those were not separate sicknesses. Those were and are interconnected illnesses that are attacking one collective body. You can't cure one without addressing all three, just like you can't remove one tumor and leave the other two tumors to metastasize. The Dr. King of 1967 upheld a philosophy that demanded that we see the connections between the struggles of Black communities and the struggles of poverty-stricken communities of all races, that we see the connections between the civil rights movement and the peace movement, that we see the connections between local injustices and global injustices. The Dr. King of 1967 showed us that the same system that oppresses the poor in Appalachia exploits workers in Asia and drops bombs in other countries.
I want to say to you as I move to my conclusion, as we talk about where do we go from here, we must honestly face the fact that the movement must address itself to the question of restructuring the whole of American society. There are 40 million poor people here. And one day we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you're raising a question about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth. When you ask that question, you begin to question the capitalistic economy. And I'm simply saying that more and more, we've got to begin to ask questions about the whole society. We are called upon to help the discouraged beggars in life's marketplace. But one day we must come to see that an edifice which produces beggars needs restructuring. It means that questions must be raised. And you see, my friends, when you deal with this, you begin to ask the question, who owns the oil? You begin to ask the question, who owns the iron ore? You begin to ask the question, why is it that people have to pay water bills in a world that's 2/3 water? These are words that must be said. Now, don't think you have me in a bind today. I'm not talking about communism. What I'm talking about is far beyond communism. My inspiration didn't come from Karl Marx. My inspiration didn't come from Engels. My inspiration didn't come from Trotsky. My inspiration didn't come from Lenin. Yes, I read Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital a long time ago. And I saw that maybe Marx didn't follow Hegel enough. He took his dialectics, but he left out his idealism and his spiritualism, and he went over to a German philosopher by the name of Feuerbach and took his materialism and made it into a system that he called dialectical materialism. I have to reject that. What I'm saying to you this morning, communism forgets that life is individual. Capitalism forgets that life is social. And the kingdom of brotherhood is found neither in the thesis of communism nor the antithesis of capitalism, but in a higher synthesis. It's found in a higher synthesis that combines the truths of both. Now, when I say questioning the whole society, it means ultimately coming to see that the problem of racism, the problem of economic exploitation, and the problem of war are all tied together. These are the triple evils that are interrelated. And if you will let me be a preacher just a little bit. One night a juror came to Jesus, and he wanted to know what he could do to be saved. Jesus didn't get bogged down on the kind of isolated approach of what you shouldn't do. Jesus didn't say, now, Nicodemus, you must stop lying. He didn't say, Nicodemus, now you must not commit adultery. He didn't say, now, Nicodemus, you must stop cheating if you're doing that. He didn't say, Nicodemus, you must stop drinking liquor if you're doing that excessively. He said something altogether different because Jesus realized something basic. That if a man will lie, he will steal. And if a man will steal, he will kill. So instead of just getting bogged down on one thing, Jesus looked at him and said, Nicodemus, you must be born again. In other words, your whole structure must be changed. A nation that will keep people in slavery for 244 years will thingify them and make them things. And therefore, they will exploit them and poor people generally, economically. And a nation that will exploit economically will have to have foreign investments and everything else, and it will have to use its military might to protect them. All of these problems are tied together.
Let's refocus. Let's realign our vision to that of Dr. King. Let's refuse to accept that our only choices are between justice and peace. Let's refuse to accept the notion that we have to choose between fighting poverty and fighting racism. They're not mutually exclusive. Let's accept that. Let's accept that they must be fought together. We are not stuck. We are not hopeless. We are not helpless. There is a path forward. Let's refocus and realign to what Dr. King called for. He called for a guaranteed basic income, for full employment, for quality education, for housing as a human right. Where do we go from here, y'all? I don't know for sure, but I do know that we go forward. I do know that we don't stand still. Standing still is not an option. We don't stay stagnant. We put one foot in front of the other and we move. We choose community over chaos again and again and again. We choose community over chaos. Stay safe and encouraged, y'all. Peace and blessings.